Welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck podcast. Today's Thursday, March 10th, 2022. Today's podcast is all about the big peak performance Apple event that was conducted a few days ago. Got my illustrious crew of journalists with me to go through that. Joining me for today's podcast is Stewart Wolpin, who scribes for Popular Mechanics, U.S. News, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other well-known publications. Rob Pegoraro, who writes frequently on tech policy for Wirecutter, PC Magazine, and US Today. I read your USA Today article the other day, Rob. And John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. And we're just happy that they're all here. And good afternoon to all three of you. And we're so excited that baseball's coming back, right, guys? I know, John, you're not that excited, but I know that Rob and Stuart are.
I'm waiting for Formula One. Formula One is in testing, so we're close. Mm.
Well, I assume that you watched the event. Did you watch it? And that's a canned question, but it's I want to make sure that you're properly prepared. You did. It's a test because I would just take you out of would put you back in the chat room if you didn't. But it was kind of an interesting event in that, again, I like to use on the Apple technology Richter scale. It was probably, whereas 10 is a big deal and 1 is not such a big deal. It's probably a 3 or 4, not because of the iPhones or the iPads, but because some of the other stuff that we'll talk about. But, give me a grade, Stuart, before we go into the topics. What was your top level thought? Was it riveting? Did it change your life?
Well, one, it was blessedly short.
Yes, it was very specific.
Usually go on for 2 to 3 hours. This one was a little less than an hour. It really, as far as I was concerned, lacked the dynamism that these things usually have. I mean, without the audience and without it being live, it just lacks any kind of immediacy. And I was on a side note, I was extraordinarily disappointed that Tim Cook didn't mention anything about
I know
what's going on in Europe. I was maybe
I was stunned. I was stunned at that.
On the Apple website now, there's a UNICEF contribution link. The fact that he said nothing, I thought was so jarring in its absence that I almost just blanked out on the rest of the event.
Right.
No, I was stunned by that too. And yes, the event was pre-recorded, but you would think they would have recorded a piece in front of that. Something like that. But there was not one reference during the entire 58-minute deal. No,
it wasn't that pre-recorded either. Remember, this has been going on for we're week 2 or whatever.
Weeks, so,
right? There was really no excuse for that. That was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Tim Cook could have at least worn like blue and yellow or something. I'm just saying.
Which I'm trying to do.
Right. Good job.
Right. I have blue.
Somebody's wearing red.
This is actually more like orange. Thank you. I'm like brick red, I guess.
Oh, so you're wearing Mets color.
Netherlands.
I thought he was Washington. That's not the Nationals color. So
no, it is not. You grab my cap.
Anyway, go ahead, John.
Oh, I was gonna say, I thought it was about a 3. I mean, it wasn't. He didn't make it relevant by not mentioning anything about the Ukraine. Apple has such a huge presence, blah blah blah. That was stupid. That wasn't tone deaf. That was just dumb.
Yeah.
So it made, as Stuart said, it made this event seem kind of less relevant. But a 3, and we're going to talk about the products, why it's even a 3. But it wasn't. I didn't watch it live, pre-recorded live. I watched it pre-recorded later. So
did you watch it at 1.5 speed or 2 speed though?
I've caught a lot of people watching things at like 6 speed lectures and all sorts of things. I didn't realize that was a thing. No, I'm a regular speed guy.
There's a great website called, I think it's 9 to 5 Mac, and they take they do this every day. It takes a couple of days for them to push it. But it's essentially, they take, regardless of how long it is, they cut it down to 7 or 8 minutes, so you can watch all the highlights in 8 minutes. So, which I recommend for you, John, next time, so you can save some value.
Just so long as they don't cut me out of anything, that's fine.
But it was interesting. Then I want to hit the what I think is the 3 big topics. Is that the event itself, I mean, what goes on the 24 to a couple of days before that is intriguing to me. I mean, there were outlets out there trying to kind of back into, well, what does Apple mean by peak performance in different languages on different websites by looking at, because apparently the translation obviously is a little bit different. And, I mean, people are so obsessed with whatever secret messaging that Apple may have embedded, in these announcements, that it's almost like a cottage industry, in terms of what they're going to pull the trigger on.
Sorry. Just all these double entendres flashed through my brain when you said that. So it's like it meant different things in different
Young boy.
So I think Apple has a problem with that, iPads, etc., which you talked about. But actually, I thought antifreeze is what I thought, but that's just me,
Well, let's hit the first topic here. A new iPhone SE, a new iPad Air with 5G I should say, are available in both models with caveats, by the way. Interestingly enough, the iPhone SE, they bumped the price up from $399 to $429, called now the 5G tax that you'll pay. And Rob, let me toss this over to you. If I'm not mistaken, the iteration of 5G they have in the iPhone SE is not even millimeter wave. It's not even the high performance not the high performance version of
that's the 5G. Right call by Apple. So the real 5G tax is when you do add millimeter wave, because if you just stick to the sub 6 gigahertz bands, you don't need to have a whole separate antenna module inside the phone. So the actual, hardware components don't change that much. And so that's what you see in most affordable phones. I've been trying out a bunch of under 500 phones. They're littering my desk right over here. And none of them support millimeter wave. My own Pixel 5a phone, no millimeter wave. Pretty much all the affordable phones I saw at MWC in Barcelona last week, no millimeter wave. It's interesting here, though, that this is a phone that Verizon is selling. So far, Verizon has insisted that if it's going to be a 5G phone that they sell, somebody's got to pay the millimeter wave tax. And in this case, they relented, I think, because the new iPhone SE does support C-band 5G, which is the useful 5G you get at Verizon, which isn't just confined to particular street corners in like DC, New York, and Chicago, but works in big chunks of cities and is still really fast. I think Apple made the right call. It's completely sensible. It is a contrast. Remember 2 years ago, the new iPhone event where it was all millimeter wave 5G is so awesome. And Apple went in on that, which they should have known better than to do that.
Yes. In fact, Joanna Stern from the Journal wrote a nice piece a couple of days ago talking about the SE and talking about the fact that, it was more of a macro comment that, 5G really hasn't taken her life over. It really hasn't lit the world on fire that you think by now, most people who have millimeter wave 5G variants in their phones, the higher end phones, you think they would be a bit more ebullient about their enthusiasm, but she certainly hasn't been. And of course, it depends on where you live, and it depends on a variety of different other factors. But for her, 5G has not turned her on from an appeal standpoint. What about you, John? What's your thoughts?
Oh, that's definitely it. I get to say, I told you so. 5G has been thrown at us for years. And I looked at the technology and go, it's got so many major problems with it. It's never going to deliver on, the promise that they have. The millimeter wave stuff is too short. The reason it only gets to the corner is because you have to double, triple the number of antennas to get it any kind of. It's also weird, the low megahertz one from the old, what do we call it, wideband, the TV station stuff. That's T-Mobile. So it's weird that Verizon is selling a phone
not doing white. Microsoft is doing white spaces. T-Mobile is doing 2.5 gigahertz, also mid-band, which was really why they bought Sprint, to get that frequency. And then
but they have a lot of the 700 megahertz bandwidth. That's all in there. That's your coverage. That's your 5G coverage.
Nationwide 5G.
Right. That's your nationwide 5G. Well, that's T-Mobile. That's what they have, all that stuff. So I wish I had it in Vermont. We're never going to see 5G in Vermont. I mean, it's just, anyway, so I'm not surprised. But I the price jump isn't bad because people keep seeing like $1,000 phones. So you see this pretty good quality phone, and you're like, nah, it's under $500. As long as it's under $500, I think it's the cost of everything right now is going up. Highest inflation rate in 40 years. So it's going to affect products we cover.
Well, yeah, actually, I want to talk about the exact point that John brought up, because I got interviewed the other day by ABC TV, and I brought that very topic up, is that with gasoline now out in friendly California, now at $6.20 a gallon, that's what I paid the other night, which was a wonderful experience. At a certain point, when gasoline gets to levels that it's never been, we're now at historical levels for gas price per gallon in the United States, and it's of course more acute in the United States, in California.
Right.
Does this become a problem for Apple come September when they announce their flagship iPhone 14, which is not going to be a budget phone? That will be in that wonderful $12, $13, $14 range. And I don't believe Apple's going to be impervious to the effects of inflation with people. And you can't eat an iPhone, right? You can't put ketchup and mustard on it and eat it. It's a very expensive meal. But Stuart, you're nodding your head. Do you agree that? I know you don't want to eat an iPhone.
People continually complain that Apple products are too expensive or more expensive, but this is their niche. But the one Achilles heel, and I'm going to talk a little more globally, is that they've been trying to make headway into both the Chinese and Indian marketplaces, which are the two biggest smartphone markets right now. And those two markets are much bigger on the sub $300 5G phones, which Apple is ever going to make. That's not their playground. So I think the SE will continue to lag behind their numbered phones, and I think this will accommodate people who want an Apple but don't want to pay twice as much for it. But my biggest protest about this phone isn't the phone or the hardware, other than the fact that it's got a Touch ID and the numbered phones don't, which makes them using them while wearing a mask far more convenient. My protest is the nomenclature. They can't keep calling these new iPhone SEs iPhone SE, because there's simply going to be an increased amount of confusion on the market. And I guarantee you that somebody's going to go into an Apple store, ask for an Apple iPhone SE, and get the old version, because there's no way to differentiate one from the other than the 5G. And I doubt very much that 5G is going to be written on the box. So I wish Apple would number the SE so everybody would know what they were getting.
Rob, could you make sure you send a note to Tim Cook about IBM, about Apple?
He's really followed me up on all my suggestions.
I'm sure they are. But, there's another piece of one of the challenges of putting 5G in phones. 5G is not a particularly battery-friendly technology. With more antennas, especially if you're using the millimeter wave, battery life can be significantly impacted. And in fact, Apple has a feature in their phones where you can actually turn off the 5G capability to extend battery life. So, Rob, what are your thoughts along those lines in terms of,
the iPhone SE, assuming the new one has the same capacity battery as the old one, which is really small.
Yes,
I can tell you the old iPhone SE, the 2020 model, the iPhone SE XP, if you will, as opposed to the iPhone SE Vista, has pretty bad battery life compared to anything else you would find sold as a new phone these days. And so I don't think the new one would be any better. It could be worse because it's got a faster processor, but maybe that also allows it to sort of.
It's probably more efficient. The processor is more
the processor can dial itself back. But on the other hand, if you're buying an iPhone SE, you're probably not an intensive user. If you're going to spend a lot of time on the phone, you don't want something with that small 4.7-inch display where iOS itself, fits badly. They had to move Control Center, instead of swipe up from the top right, you swipe up from the bottom. So it's unlike every other iDevice from Apple. So I think it's probably fine in this case. It's a phone you'll need to recharge every night. But if you have that, you're probably not spending so much time on it anyways. So I would guess in practice, people will, put it down on the nightstand at 11 p.m. and it won't be that much below the average iPhone 13 or iPhone 14.
Now, we've been spending all this time talking about the iPhone SE. We should give the iPad Air changes a little bit of love here. They did add 5G support. It's at that's their entry-level friendly price point iPads. It does have an M1 processor that's using Apple Silicon, which I think is interesting. But, John, do you even think it matters anymore, frankly, in terms of...
Well, I think a lot of people wanted this upgrade, however you want to typify it. There hasn't been a new iPad Air for a number of years. It's been a couple of years anyway. So people wanted, I felt like there was some demand out there. Like just, anecdotally, like people ask me about the Volvo wagons all the time. When are we going to get the Volvo wagon back? It was sort of like, is there a new iPad Air out? So I think there's more appetite for it than people generally think they are. We kind of overlooked the tablet category a little bit, but so I wasn't blown away by it, but I thought it was a good update actually to the product.
Let us hit the next topic, which is really where the big information is here. Let me get to the next slide here. Apple introduces M1 Ultra. Again, it wasn't a big secret. They knew there was going to come out with some type of faster iteration of the M1 Apple Silicon. I think what's fascinating to me, and I was having this chat with someone from another major processor company, I wouldn't say who they are, but what's intriguing to me was the concept. Apple does such a great job of presenting a technology that's been out there for some time and then implying very strongly that they invented it. And this whole notion of taking two M1 Pro Maxes and literally connecting them together with their, a great marketing phrase was called Ultra Connect, or they had a marketing description for it.
Super duper.
The John Quain interconnect technology. But other companies have been able to do that for some time. Now, that kind of capability is really at the high end, which is really where the Ultra is positioned. It's really positioned for professional content developers, not you doing 20-second TikTok videos, which I know Stuart's fond of, but it's really intended for people who are really almost creating content for Hollywood studios and things like that, which is not a humongous audience, but it's a very influential audience. So what did you think, Stuart? And by the way, give me some of your feedback on the way that Apple, in contrast to other companies, articulate and position and message relatively complex topics like a processor, because I'm always fascinated with that. I think Apple does really a terrific job on that, because there are a lot of non-technical people that watch their keynotes, but don't want to deep dive into the technology. But Apple seems to be very mindful in the way they create very compelling messaging around a processor introduction. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I thought it was interesting, and this may have been also for the Studio Mac, is that almost all the developers that they interviewed, were women, which I thought was fascinating. But in terms of the chip themselves, I also have a nomenclature problem with this. They've got the Pro, the Max, and the Ultra, and if I didn't know, how am I supposed to differentiate between those three, which is which and which does what? I think that's amazing. Why didn't they just call the damn thing the M2, since they're essentially got two M1s here, and just stop it with these confusing Pro, Ultra, Max. Right now I've got a phone that's both a Pro and a Max. So I thought that was good. In terms of the technology, I think the chip itself is obviously going to appeal only to people at the way upper end of the spectrum. So I don't think it really mattered what Apple said. My own take is that the most fascinating part is the presentation. I think they said 114 billion
transistors.
That's a number that even the non-tech is going to be impressed by. Whether or not it is, I thought it was impressive. So, but the people that they're appealing to, and the comparisons are always nonsense, because you don't know exactly what they're comparing it to or who's doing the comparing. But the people in the know understand a lot of the underlying technical aspects involved. So my issue was just why do we need three chips with essentially the same name? And why aren't you telling me what applications each one is good for, who the customers are, that sort of thing. I mean, I was looking.
I want Rob to kind of respond to that, because Rob, what's interesting about, and I think Stewart's exactly right, when you look at their keynotes, the M1 related keynotes over the last year and a half or so, what's interesting is when they show benchmarks, they're almost like anonymous benchmarks. Now, I know they can back them up, but when you watch an AMD or an Intel event, because they've been in the business for so long, they really provide very specific details on what they're showcasing from a benchmarking standpoint, whether they're using third-party benchmarks from Tom's Hardware or whatever. But it's interesting how Apple can get away with showing, and I really mean that phrase deliberately, how the benchmark stuff they show are very simple charts by one arc here, and here's the new M1 Ultra, and it's a bigger arc. That's got to be better if it's a bigger arc. So what's your response to the way Apple just messages their benchmarking in their events?
They have, shied away from emphasizing things like clock speed, even to the extent. I mean, I remember there was this one Macworld Expo New York keynote where they spent like 20 minutes trying to explain how clock speed was nonsense. Intel processors pay the pipeline tax that PowerPC chips don't have to pay. And then, of course, 5 years later, they switched to Intel chips.
A punchline.
Yeah. And then, of course, now Intel's out as well. So, yeah, I don't know. In this case, in the case of this very high-end processor that you apparently cannot hope to fit in a laptop, it's only in desktops.
Right.
I don't think it's going to hold them back with consumers. I think the point about them having so many different kinds of processors does fit into the fact that their product lineup has gotten cluttered. You have the iPad. The iPad Air is more expensive than the iPad, whereas a MacBook Air is less expensive than a MacBook. Then you have the iPad Pro, which is somehow higher and is close to a laptop, but not really. You have the MacBook Pro, which is finally updated. But then the desktop lineup, you have the Mac Mini, like this one right on my desk. You have the iMac, where the 27-inch one's been quietly discontinued. Now you have the Mac Studio, and the Mac Pro is somewhere else out there. And, they used to be able to update their hardware a little more timely than they do these days.
And John, it's interesting. I read a piece this morning that the difference in weight between the, which we're going to talk about in a second, that new Mac Studio, between the M1 Ultra and the M1 Max, so the single processor versus the two flavor version, there's like a 2, or I could be wrong, but I think there's a 2.5 pound differential between the two models, implying that whatever thermals and heat sink and other stuff they have in the higher end model, that's a big. Now, of course, it's a desktop, and it's not a big, because you're not going to drag that around. But it just goes to show you that even that piece of Apple technology that's running so quickly, there, I'm not sure you would see other processor companies, put a 3 pound or 2.5 pound heat sink solution in, just to make the point where, hey, we can do a faster processor. So, any thoughts on that?
Right. Well, it definitely usually is the heat that you're worried about. You can jam the clock speed as high as you want, but you've got to dissipate the heat. You're going to create a lot of heat. We're also going to use a fair amount of power. And now I think people are long term, given the geopolitical situation, they're going to come back to, right, we shouldn't be using so much power on OLED screens, which suck a lot of power. If you have an OLED TV going, wow, your electric bill is going to go up. And, you put something like that on your desk, your electric bill is going to go up substantially, not only just for the item itself that's going to use the power, which they don't talk about. There's, and then there's going to be the air conditioning that's going to go up because you're dissipating all that heat in your office. So now you're going to have to do more of that. So there are lots of reasons not to go that way. If you really don't need that power, I think the machine I started looking at was $4,000 when I started playing around with, it would be nice to have. So yeah.
I did the same thing. And by the time you add that high-end display, which you can configure, you can add different. You're talking. It's easy to get to $8,000 or $9,000.
I was just going to say, it's more like $8,000. Yeah.
Which is, by the way, that's the gift that Rob is going to send me for Christmas. So I appreciate that.
Right. I mean, look, If you're a video editor working on, streaming movies, or, you've got a series on Netflix or something, then yeah, that's the machine you need to have, something like that. But for the rest of us, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's
it's sort of like having
have
an SD card slot, right? I don't, the only people I know that use SD card slots, aside from people like us, are photographers. So,
Yes.
Professional photographers who are going to take it out of their DSLR and put it in the machine. So that's really who it's for. But you're right about the benchmarking. Stuart knows this used to be the bane of my existence at PC Magazine and PC Labs. I spent a lot of late nights in the stupid lab there going over benchmarks that we developed. And yeah, how meaningful are they these days? I don't know. It's all really about video processing. And so that's the big thing.
Let us hit the last topic that I want to chat about, and that is, which again, hardware is hardware. This is the Mac Studio is a brand new form factor for Apple, and it's kind of it's interesting. It's not replacing, at least not yet, their Xeon-based, the trash can, I think it's called, that Mac Pro. No, that's what it's commonly called. That product is almost like a mini tower, and it's got lots of expandability, equally very expensive. But this is kind of an interesting form factor because it kind of fits in between the Mac Mini, because it really is just it's a taller Mac Mini, essentially, when you look at the measurements. But so, Stuart, what is your thought on, again, could you, putting money aside, which is always a hard thing to do, could you recommend, because I'm sure you get as many calls and emails and messages from friends who, hey, I want to buy a Mac, what should I buy? I'm sure you get that more than occasionally.
Right.
Could you ever rationalize a Mac Studio for a mainstream user, or do you think it's completely overkill?
I'm with you on that. I could not recommend it. Some of the reasons for what John said. The fact that, Apple has made its name by combining everything in one unit. I am right now talking to you on a 27-inch iMac. And I'm really pissed off because I've got a 2015 version, and there's no M1 chip replacement for it. So my only choice, I know that there are a lot of people out there with 27-inch iMacs, I am not the only one, our only replacement path now is the lower end Mac Studio and a separate monitor. And I was sort of hoping that maybe I could use my current iMac, 27-inch iMac, as a dumb monitor, and apparently you cannot. So if I'm going to upgrade, I'm going to have to buy the Mac Studio, and there is no way I'm buying that studio display. It's way too much display for my purposes. I'll go out and get the LG, which is like $500 or $1,000 cheaper. It's a 4K versus 5K, but for mainstream 27-inch iMac users, that makes a hell of a lot more sense than spending another $1,500 on a screen. Right. So, my take is simply from a personal point of view, that if I want to step up to an M1 Mac, my only choice is the Mac Studio. And I'm a little pissed off at that.
Well, I think, Rob alluded to that, and that Apple has a tendency, especially during this M1 transition over the last couple of years, which they've been very, very clear. It was going to take them about 2 years to transition. They're doing it in piecemeal fashion. So, guys like you who, and I had an iMac, the 27, I had the 2019 model, I've always been a bit frustrated with the all-in-one form factors because there's very little upgradability. If there's no upgradability, I think
you have to replace one, you have to replace both. Whereas with the Mac Studio, that's fine to just replace one. I'm sure that's the reason that Rob has a Mac Mini. But to not at least offer me the option, number one, and not enabling my current display to be used as a dumb terminal pisses me off even more, because I would definitely, for the $2,000, get that entry-level Mac Studio. It's got a lot more juice than I've got in inputs and whatnot. Why can't I use my existing 27-inch Mac as a dumb terminal?
John, did you order a Mac Studio? Come on, you can tell the truth. Did you order one as soon as they came out? Come on.
No, I'm with Stuart on this. I feel the same way. And then some of the obvious things for those of us who are used to plugging and playing things is not being able to use that as a monitor. That just seems ridiculous, right? So yeah, I agree. And it's odd. generally, I think Apple is kind of sensitive to those paths and thinks about where their users and the people that like their products go, and sort of can see that path. So I'm a little surprised. Maybe there's something else coming to sort of to fill that hole. But yeah, I totally agree with him.
Rob, we're over
Yeah,
two.
thanks.
Come on, the other two guys didn't order one yet. Did you order one yet? Come on, you can tell us.
So, I was watching this thing. My worry, having bought this Mac Mini last September, when it had already been in the market for, not over
6 months,
a year.
9 months,
Wow.
9 months. I think.
I'm going to have the Apple experience where you buy something and then 2 months later they introduce a better version. So I was, to be honest, a little relieved that there was no Mac Mini. And then once they'd gone after more than like a minute talking about the cooling system on the Mac Studio, I'm like, okay, this is not for me. I don't need to worry about this. I'm going to guess the price is going to be around $2,000, and yes, starting at that. Yeah, it's an interesting product. People who need it, if you work on video, yeah, that's the computer for you. I get it. It's not something I will ever be buying. I don't need it. I stick words together. That's pretty, low impact processing wise, and the studio display as well. But then again, I see these people wringing their hands like we don't have. Apple doesn't sell a monitor. You can buy one from someone else and plug it in. These things really do work. I swear. The Philips monitor I have here.
That's always intrigued me, that even the professional video content professionals, I understand the whole, you want to have a very fast system because you want to encode and decode video very quickly, and time is money, right? If you want to take a 7K or 8K video, instead of 9 hours to render a 60-minute video, it only takes 20 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever the application you're using. So I get that. But the studio display thing, they would argue that, color accuracy is a big deal. When you're producing content, understanding the granularity of colors in a professional environment where you might be producing content, showing up on a 50-foot screen in a movie theater. You can only do that if you have a display that's capable of really displaying incredibly accurate and precise colors. So that's what their argument would be. Correct, Rob?
Right.
Any closing thoughts, guys, on this, on the Mac Studio and Studio? This is, kind of, no, actually, we're going 32 minutes, so this is our typical length for a podcast. But did anything else?
It's a good
did anything
reason
else strike you up?
Kept this thing that the presentation was as short as it was, because they didn't have a whole lot to sell. I think the most consumer relevant parts of the whole thing, we talked about, the new iPhone SE. Baseball games on Apple TV Plus on Fridays.
I thought that was interesting. Also, is Kurt Gowdy coming back?
Good question. I don't know.
You know what though? We can close on that one topic. Is that, yes, I guess it makes your Apple TV Plus subscription that much more valuable. That's not a cost center, right? That's included in the base Apple TV Plus package.
Yeah, it's not an add-on thing. Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, subscribing to professional sports on with these online subscriptions, it's a very much like a labyrinth type of thing. Some of the like MLB that has blackout, and you guys know this, has blackout restrictions. And if you're if you're living if you're a Yankee fan and you live in the Bronx, for example, or New Jersey, where the YES network operates, you can't. Most local games are not broadcast locally anymore. I mean, they've dialed that back down dramatically. You have to watch them online, and you may not be able to watch them if you're in market.
That's what I was curious about, whether or not, especially in New York, where the Mets and the Yankees are going to be, I wouldn't say dominating, but there'll be a lot of games with the Mets and the Yankees on the Apple TV, since it's the biggest market, and they're both good. Whether or not, if it's on Apple TV, well, that means I won't be able to watch it any other way. Which I will be very disappointed. I mean, I have Apple TV, and that's fine. But a lot of people, I thought I saw the other day that amongst all the major streamers, Apple TV Plus had the largest churn rate. And people are buying it to watch one or two things and then turning it off. And I think this might impact a lot of people who watch the Mets and the Yankees or the Dodgers out in LA, whether or not that will mean the local blackout will happen and if you don't have an Apple TV Plus subscription, you are SOL, which I think a lot.
The bigger problem there, though, it's outside of Friday night games. It's that regional sports networks, which carry all the local games, for a while they were getting increasing carriage on streaming services, and then a couple of years ago, the streaming services were like, "No, you people charge too much." So, like, Yes got dropped by a bunch of places. SNY, the Red Sox's NESN, is gone. So I think right now, if you pay for AT&T TV, which is now DirecTV Stream, what is it now under they're on name number 6. They have pretty much every RSN, but in general, yeah, and this is a problem that the teams need to solve, because they're paying with salaries based on huge contracts where RSN's paid, assuming that the pay TV model, as it existed 5 years ago, would stick around forever, which was a stupid thing to predict. Now they're stuck with it. I mean, like the Dodgers, their regional sports network was some crazy big deal, and it was so expensive that no one carried it for years. And the sports nets are going to have to go direct to consumer at some point, but RSN DTC, as they say, that there's so many vested economic interests. No one knows how it's going to do it. And I know that the Washington Nationals Mid-Atlantic Sports Network is so poorly run, they will be the last to figure out some direct-to-customer option. I'm sure that 2 years from now, I will still be seeing more games in person at Nats Park than on any screen in my house.
Probably true. Yeah.
Well, guys, let's wrap this up. Appreciate your time. Thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure that you make the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute going forward. We really would appreciate that. And please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina, at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.